My name is Hannah Mitchell. I am 19 years old, and if you had seen me the night I collapsed in front of the Milwaukee Police Department, you would not have recognized me. My clothes were ripped, my face swollen with bruises, and blood trickled slowly from the corner of my mouth. In my hand, I clutched a cracked phone, the screen still glowing, playing a video that should never have existed. It was filmed by my own sister Madison, who laughed behind the camera, while my stepfather Harold shoved me into a dog crate like I was an animal. In the background, my mother Donna's voice sneered with a cold satisfaction that pierced deeper than any slap. That was the moment strangers rushed toward me, officers spilling out of the station doors, their radios crackling as one shouted for paramedics. But in those seconds, all I could think was one question: how had I become entertainment for the people who were supposed to protect me? What would you do if your own family turned your suffering into a show? The story did not begin at the police station, but that night was the brutal climax of years of being silenced, belittled, and controlled, until my body finally gave out in the only place that could save me. I remember running through the streets of downtown Milwaukee, the bright lights of the Pfister Hotel glimmering across the intersection, while I clutched my chest and gasped for air. I had escaped the garage where the crate sat metal bars pressing into my skin, where the smell of oil and gasoline clung to the air as Harold's fists had rained down. My sister's phone camera light had blinded me as she cheered for another take. My mother leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, lips curling in that familiar sneer that told me she saw no daughter in me, only a burden. I ran until my knees buckled, until the pavement scraped my palms, until the sound of car horns blurred with the ringing in my ears. The neon signs of the city pulsed like warnings, but also like a strange beacon that guided me toward the only sanctuary left. The heavy glass doors of the police station reflected my broken face back at me, distorted in the glow of the street lamps, and for a fleeting second, I wondered if they would believe me or if they would send me back. Then the phone slipped from my trembling hand and landed on the ground, the video playing loud enough for anyone to hear. The recording captured Harold's gruff voice telling me to shut up as he slammed the crate door. Madison's giggles filled the space. Then Donna's chilling words cut through. She deserves it. That was the proof I had clung to while running barefoot across the freezing sidewalk, proof that my suffering was not just in my head, proof that what they had done to me could never again be explained away as discipline or a joke. I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a hoarse whisper. The officers lifted me onto a stretcher, and the world tilted sideways, red and blue lights flashing above me as the sirens wailed. I thought of my father, the real one, who had died years earlier in a crash on Highway 41, and I wished he could have seen me now, not because I was strong, but because I was still alive. That thought alone was the thin thread keeping me conscious as I faded in and out. This was not the life I had chosen. I was supposed to be a normal college girl, balancing classes at the local community college with shifts at a cafe near the Pfister Hotel. I was supposed to be worried about exams tips and maybe saving enough to rent a small apartment. Instead, I was dragged back each night into a house that felt like a cage long before Harold decided to show me what a cage actually looked like. In that house, dinner was an order shouted by Harold, silence was commanded by Donna, and laughter belonged only to Madison. I was the shadow, the one who washed dishes, folded clothes, and received the blame. Whenever I tried to push back, Harold's eyes narrowed with a quiet rage that promised pain. I learned to shrink myself to survive until shrinking was no longer enough. What happened that night was not the first time Madison had filmed me, but it was the first time the violence was so undeniable, so public, that strangers could see it and know I was not exaggerating. The video showed a teenage girl reduced to tears, shoved into a crate, while her own family turned her pain into content. It was not a prank, it was not discipline, it was cruelty. As I lay on the cold stretcher outside the police station, I realized that everything was about to change. For the first time, the truth was no longer trapped inside the four walls of our house. It had spilled into the world, recorded, undeniable, and waiting for justice to answer. The question was whether anyone would care enough to fight for me when my own family would not. That night marked the beginning of my battle, and it began with collapse, humiliation, and the haunting sound of my mother's sneer echoing through the phone that would later save me. Before the night when everything exploded before police lights and sirens, my life already carried cracks that had been widening since childhood. I grew up in Milwaukee in a modest house on the south side where winters were brutal and the wind off Lake Michigan could slice right through your coat. My earliest memories are of my father, James Mitchell, a truck driver who loved taking me and Madison to the park near Bayview on his days off. He smelled like engine oil and peppermint gum, and he would lift us high above his head, declaring that his daughters would always fly higher than he ever could. Then when I was 10, his semi jackknifed on Highway 41 during a snowstorm. One phone call ended the sense of safety I had taken for granted. From that moment on, my world tilted. My mother, Donna, changed after his funeral. She was 38, then still beautiful but hardened. She remarried within 2 years to Harold Carter, a man who seemed at first to be steady and reliable. He worked at a construction company, tall and broad, with a handshake that squeezed too hard, as if he was always proving something. Neighbors thought Donna was lucky to have found someone to provide for us. I wanted to believe it too. At first, Harold bought me small gifts, a notebook for drawing a pair of sneakers, but those gifts came with unspoken strings. Soon the warmth faded, replaced by a sharpness that cut deeper with every year. By the time I was 16, the division in our family was clear. Madison, 2 years older, flourished under Harold's attention. She got new clothes, driving lessons, and an iPhone before I ever touched one. I got hand-me-downs and endless chores. At dinner, Harold would sit at the head of the table like a judge while Madison chatted easily with him about school gossip and new fashion trends. I sat quietly pushing potatoes around my plate, hoping he would forget I existed. Donna would watch me with thinly veiled disdain, correcting the way I sat or accusing me of having a bad attitude. The smallest sigh could set her off. The house itself reflected the imbalance. Madison's room was painted a bright lavender with fairy lights strung across the ceiling. Mine was cramped and dull with peeling wallpaper and a single lamp that flickered whenever I turned it on. Whenever Madison wanted something new, Donna and Harold found a way to make it happen. When I asked for even basic things like new textbooks or help with school fees, the answer was always that money was tight. Yet somehow, there was always enough for Madison's cheerleading trips or the latest phone case she had to have. I learned quickly that speaking up came with consequences. When I complained about unfairness, Harold would slam his fork down and growl that I was ungrateful. Donna would echo him, telling me that I was lucky to have a roof over my head. Madison would smirk, sipping her soda, enjoying the performance. The message was clear: I did not matter, but the pressure did not stay confined to words. Harold had a way of controlling the air in the house. He demanded silence when he watched television. He set curfews that applied only to me, not to Madison. If I came home a few minutes late from my shift at the cafe near the Pfister Hotel, he would be waiting in the driveway, arms crossed, ready to interrogate me like I had committed a crime. My phone was checked without warning. My friends were dismissed as bad influences. Every inch of freedom I tried to claim was stripped away, leaving me smaller and more cautious each day. The subtle cruelties built up. I was often forced to eat after everyone else, picking at leftovers. Sometimes Harold would take my dinner plate away halfway through, saying that I did not deserve it because of my attitude. Madison would laugh, pulling out her phone to snap pictures, whispering to friends that her sister was being dramatic again. Once, she posted a blurry shot of me wiping tears at the sink with the caption, "Drama Queen can't handle chores." I begged her to take it down, but she only giggled and said, "Maybe if you were funnier, people would like you." Donna saw the post and said nothing, only that I should toughen up. By the time I turned 17, I was already shrinking inside myself, my voice quieter each week. Teachers at school noticed my tired eyes and slipping grades, but I brushed off their concerns. What could I say? That my stepfather controlled every move, that my mother acted like a warden rather than a parent, that my own sister found joy in capturing my humiliation. It was easier to say I was stressed from work. Work at the cafe became my only escape. The steady hum of conversation, the smell of espresso, and the chatter of regular customers gave me a glimpse of normalcy. Sometimes I would linger even after my shift, wiping tables twice, just to delay going home. My manager, Mrs. Lawson, once asked if everything was okay. I forced a smile and said yes, because what good would it do to tell her the truth? The walls of my house were thick, but the silence inside them was thicker. Family dinners grew heavier. Harold's voice filled the room like smoke. Donna's eyes scanned me for flaws. Madison's phone camera was always nearby, catching moments I did not want the world to see. The tension wrapped around me like chains. I remember one particular night when Harold declared that Madison would be getting a used car for her 21st birthday. Donna clapped her hands in delight. I asked quietly what would happen when I turned 20. Harold glared at me. "You will be lucky to have bus fare." Madison laughed so hard she nearly spilled her drink. That was the tone of our household generosity for one ridicule for the other. Each slight might have seemed small to an outsider, but together they carved deep wounds. I stopped expecting kindness. I stopped expecting protection. Instead, I learned to expect laughter at my pain. Madison's camera became a weapon sharper than any blade, freezing my worst moments to replay for her friends. Harold's control was the hammer that kept me pinned down. Donna's sneer was the seal of approval on every act of cruelty. This was my everyday life, the roots of a toxic garden that grew thornier with each season. And while I endured it quietly for years, the truth is that silence never keeps monsters away. It only feeds them. My silence allowed Harold's control to tighten, Madison's ridicule to spread, and Donna's coldness to harden into open hostility. By 19, I was not just a girl living in a bad home. I was a prisoner waiting for the next blow. What I did not know then was that my breaking point was closer than I realized, and when it came, it would not be hidden behind closed doors. It would be filmed, shared, and mocked until strangers saw what my family insisted was normal discipline. Those years of small cruelties were only the prelude to the night when my life cracked open in front of the entire world. It happened on a night that seemed ordinary at first, a Wednesday in late January. The kind of night when the snow on the sidewalks had turned gray from car exhaust and the streetlights buzzed faintly above Milwaukee's South Side. I had just come home from a late shift at the cafe near the Pfister Hotel, my apron still smelling faintly of coffee grounds and pastries. My feet ached. My backpack felt heavy with textbooks, and all I wanted was to slip quietly into my room and fall asleep. But peace in that house was always an illusion. The moment the front door closed behind me, Harold's voice thundered from the living room. "You are late." I froze, glancing at the clock. It was 9:40, only 10 minutes past my curfew. I opened my mouth to explain that a customer had spilled coffee right at closing and I had stayed to help clean, but the explanation did not matter. In Harold's world, my existence was an inconvenience and every excuse a lie. I tried to keep my voice calm. "I was helping at work," I said. The words barely left my mouth before Harold was on his feet, his face flushed with anger, eyes narrowing like a predator. Donna sat beside him on the couch, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the television as if ignoring what was about to happen would absolve her of responsibility. Madison lounged nearby, phone in hand, her expression brightening as if anticipating entertainment. When Harold stormed toward me, I knew what was coming. The first blow was a fist into my back sharp enough to knock the air from my lungs. Pain shot through me, radiating down my spine, and I staggered forward, clutching at the wall. The sound that followed was not my cry, but Madison's laughter. I turned my head just enough to see the glow of her phone camera trained on me. She was filming, her voice high with glee as she said, "Look at her! She can't even stand straight." I begged her to stop. My voice breaking, but she only giggled louder. Harold shoved me again, his words slicing as cruelly as his fists. "You think you can disobey me. You think your excuses matter. You are nothing but a burden." Each word pounded into me with the rhythm of his rage. I stumbled, catching myself on the edge of the kitchen counter, my breath ragged tears blurring my vision, and still Madison kept filming. The red recording light glared like an accusation, a permanent reminder that my suffering was content for her amusement. I tried to retreat toward the stairs, hoping to escape into my room, but Harold blocked the path. He jabbed a finger into my chest, hard enough to leave a bruise, then shoved me back against the counter. Donna finally spoke, her voice cold and detached. "Stop crying, Hannah. You brought this on yourself." The words stung more than Harold's fists. My own mother, the woman who had once held me after nightmares when I was a child, now looked at me with contempt, as if I were nothing more than a problem to be managed. The world narrowed to the sound of my sister's laughter and the weight of Harold's fists. Finally, when I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath, Harold stepped back, satisfied. Madison lowered the phone just long enough to sneer at me, then raised it again, capturing my trembling hands as I tried to push myself up. That is when she spoke the words that would haunt me. Drama queen cannot handle a joke. She posted the clip within minutes, and by the time I managed to crawl into my room, the video had already spread among her friends. My phone buzzed with notifications, messages from classmates I barely knew. Some laughed. Some asked if it was real. Others sent shocked emojis without words. My humiliation was no longer confined within the walls of our house. It was public broadcast like a cheap spectacle. I lay on my bed that night, my back throbbing, my heart heavier than my bruises. Every vibration of my phone felt like another blow. I wanted to disappear, to vanish into the darkness and never return. For the first time, I wondered if survival was worth it, when survival meant being a punching bag for the people who were supposed to love me. I pressed a pillow over my face to muffle my sobs, but even in that private moment, I could not escape the echo of Madison's laughter. The next day at school was worse. Whispers followed me down the hallway. Some students stared with pity, others with amusement. A group of boys snickered as I passed one of them, mimicking my collapse from the video. I felt exposed, stripped of dignity. Teachers gave me sympathetic looks but said nothing, perhaps unsure how to intervene or unwilling to challenge what they assumed was family business. Every step I took was heavy with shame. When I returned home that evening, Madison was waiting. She leaned against the doorway of my room phone, in hand smirk plastered on her face. "Everyone loved it," she said, scrolling through comments. "You should be grateful. You are finally popular." I wanted to scream, to snatch the phone from her hands and smash it to pieces, but fear held me still. Harold's heavy footsteps in the hallway reminded me of the price of defiance. So I stayed silent, swallowing my rage until it burned like acid inside me. That night, staring at the cracked ceiling of my room, I realized something had shifted. It was no longer just about surviving the blows or enduring the sneers. It was about reclaiming the truth of who I was. If Madison could twist my pain into a joke, if Harold could reduce me to nothing more than a punching bag, then I had to find a way to show the world that I was more than their victim. I did not know how yet, but I knew one thing. Silence had kept me trapped, and silence had given them power. If I wanted to break free, I needed to fight back, even if it was only in small, hidden ways. The first tragedy was not just the bruises or the humiliation of a viral video. It was the realization that my family would never protect me, that my mother's sneer was as dangerous as Harold's fists, that my sister's laughter could wound deeper than words. That night carved a scar into my soul that no therapy could erase. But it also planted the seed of resistance, a spark of defiance that would grow with each new act of cruelty. They thought they had broken me. What they did not know was that every blow, every sneer, every cruel laugh was building a fire that would one day burn through the walls of that house and expose them all. After that first viral video, nothing went back to normal. If anything, the balance of power inside our house grew sharper and heavier, pressing down on me like weights I could not push away. Harold had tasted the thrill of complete control. Madison had learned how much attention she could get from showcasing my pain, and Donna had decided that indifference was her most useful role. For me, every day became a new test of endurance, a question of how much more I could take before breaking. The days after the video spread at school were unbearable. I walked through the hallways with my head lowered, ears burning from the whispers that trailed me. Teachers noticed, but none dared step into the storm. I imagined they told themselves it was not their place. At home, Harold smirked whenever my phone buzzed with new notifications. He would snatch the device from my hand and scroll through comments, reading aloud the cruelest ones. "Look at this," he chuckled once. "Someone says you fall like a sack of bricks." "That is funny, Hannah." I stood frozen, every word sinking like stones in my chest. Madison leaned over his shoulder, giggling. Donna sat silently in her chair, sipping tea, her eyes cold. The rules of the house tightened after that. Harold set stricter curfews. He demanded to know where I was every hour. If I was late from work by even 5 minutes, he would confiscate my phone or tear apart my backpack searching for imagined evidence of rebellion. He went through my notebooks, my school assignments, even my uniform pockets. Privacy became a luxury I no longer had. Donna reinforced his control by saying I should be grateful for structure, that discipline was a gift. Madison, meanwhile, turned into a guard dog reporting on every small misstep I made. If I sighed too loudly at dinner, she would snap a photo and send it to Harold captioned with a mocking comment. The small cruelties stacked one after another. I was often forced to stand at the kitchen sink for hours scrubbing dishes that were already clean. If Harold thought I was too slow, he would hurl a plate into the trash, accusing me of being wasteful and order me to start again. Sometimes he made me eat alone after everyone else had finished a silent punishment that cut more deeply than raised voices. Madison would sneak behind me, recording my hunched shoulders and posting clips with sarcastic captions about my bad attitude. I could not escape her phone camera, its lens always waiting to catch me at my weakest. The breaking point of winter came one evening when I returned from the cafe, exhausted. Snow clung to my boots and my fingers were numb. I opened the front door to find Harold standing in the hallway holding one of my textbooks. "Explain this," he demanded, shoving the book into my chest. It was my sociology text, borrowed from the library, filled with notes about family dynamics and abuse cycles. He had read enough of my scribbles to sense my growing awareness of what was happening in our home. "You think you are smarter than me?" he growled. "You think writing down your little thoughts will save you?" Before I could respond, he ripped several pages out and tossed them into the fireplace, the flames consuming my words. Madison caught the moment on camera, her laughter echoing in my ears. Donna shook her head at me and said, "You never learn, do you?" The punishments grew more creative. One night, I returned home late because the bus broke down near Bayview. Harold did not believe me. He dragged my backpack into the living room, dumping everything onto the carpet. When a packet of unopened aspirin rolled out, he accused me of hiding drugs. My protests meant nothing. He slapped the pills into Madison's hand and said, "Record this." Madison filmed me sobbing as he screamed that I was a liar, a disgrace, and unworthy of the Mitchell name. Donna's voice floated from the corner, steady and chilling. "Let her cry. She deserves it." It was not only physical pain, but the constant erosion of dignity. Every time Madison posted another clip, I lost a piece of myself. I began to dread the sound of a notification, knowing it might mean more people laughing at my suffering. At the cafe, customers whispered and my coworkers avoided eye contact. Even Mrs. Lawson, who had once asked gently if I was okay, now only gave me sad smiles that I could not bear. My humiliation had become public currency, and my family was getting rich off the attention. Then came the night that shifted everything further down the spiral. It was a Saturday in February, bitterly cold, the kind of night when the wind howled through every crack in the house. I had been working on an essay when Harold's footsteps thundered upstairs. He flung open my door and ordered me to the garage. Confused and afraid, I followed, my stomach twisting. Madison was already there, phone in hand, smirk fixed on her face. The garage smelled of oil and damp cement. In the corner sat a dog crate Harold had bought months earlier for a cousin's pet that never came. It had always been there, half forgotten. Until that night. "Get in." Harold ordered, his voice low and dangerous. My knees buckled. I stammered, begging him to stop, but he shoved me forward. Madison lifted her phone, the light glaring in my eyes, and began recording. Donna appeared at the doorway, her lips curling in a sneer. "Maybe this will teach her some manners." The cold metal bars pressed against my skin as Harold forced me inside, slamming the door shut. The lock clicked, sealing me into a cage meant for an animal. Madison's laughter rang out sharp and cruel as she narrated for her audience. "Look at this, everyone. Hannah thinks she is a person, but she belongs in here." I pressed my face against the bars, tears streaming, humiliation burning hotter than fear. I could hear Harold chuckling behind me, could see Donna's silhouette shaking her head as if I had asked for this. Every second in that crate felt like hours, the cold seeping into my bones, my back aching from the cramped space. Madison zoomed in on my tear-streaked face, whispering, "Smile for the camera." That moment was the darkest low I had known. I was no longer a daughter or a sister. I was a spectacle, a thing, a piece of content to be consumed. The betrayal cut deeper than the bruises. My family had chosen to turn my suffering into entertainment, and I was powerless inside those bars. Yet, even in that pit of despair, a small spark of defiance flickered. My hands trembled, but inside my pocket I felt the old phone I had hidden away weeks earlier. Harold had not found it. They had not thought to search me. The camera was recording audio capturing every word, every laugh, every cruel sneer. That night, I learned something vital. They could lock me in a crate, they could strip me of dignity, but they could not erase the evidence I was gathering. Each second they recorded me for their amusement, I was recording them for my survival. The escalation of violence had crossed a line that could never be defended as discipline or a joke. It was criminal, and now I had proof. I did not know when or how I would use it. But deep inside, as I shivered against the metal bars, I swore that one day those recordings would be their undoing. The night I was shoved into the crate should have been the end of me the moment I surrendered completely. But strangely, it became the opposite. As the lock clicked and the cold steel pressed into my skin, I realized something that would carry me through every beating and every sneer that followed. They wanted me broken, but I had something they did not know about something more powerful than brute strength. I had proof. And proof could be louder than their laughter, sharper than Harold's fists, and colder than Donna's indifference. I waited until the house quieted, until the garage light flickered off and the door shut. I stayed crouched, muscles burning, until I heard Harold's footsteps retreat upstairs. My breath came shallow, fogging the metal bars. Only Madison lingered, her phone still in her hand, reviewing the video she had just made. I could hear her giggles as she whispered to herself about how many likes it would get. For a moment, I thought she might unlock the crate, just to get another angle. Instead, she finally left her footsteps echoing off the concrete. Alone in the dark, I pulled the small battered phone from my pocket. Its screen was cracked, but the red recording light glowed steadily. Every word had been captured, the shoves, the laughter, Donna's sneer. I pressed it to my chest like a lifeline. The next morning, Harold acted as if nothing had happened. He ate breakfast with Donna and Madison, reading the newspaper, sipping his coffee. Donna discussed bills. Madison showed him clips on her phone. I sat silently, pushing cereal around my bowl, my back aching, my knees stiff from the cramped hours in the crate. They laughed, but I barely heard. All I could think was, you do not know I have your words trapped in this phone. You do not know I am watching you as carefully as you are watching me. That was the beginning of my quiet resistance. I started keeping the old phone with me at all times, hidden in a pocket or tucked into my sleeve. Whenever Harold erupted, whenever Donna dismissed me, whenever Madison mocked me, I pressed record. My heart pounded each time, terrified they would discover it. But the fear was balanced by something new: purpose. Each clip became a brick in the case. I was building a case they did not know existed. It was around this time that Evelyn Parker noticed the change in me. Evelyn had been my closest friend since middle school, though we saw less of each other once Harold tightened his rules. Still, she came by the cafe sometimes, and one evening she spotted me wincing as I reached for a tray. She pulled me aside, concern written across her face. "Hannah, what happened?" I lied, saying I had slipped on ice. Her eyes narrowed. She did not believe me. When she brushed her hand against mine, she felt the swelling on my knuckles. She whispered, "You cannot keep this inside." That night after closing, I walked her to the bus stop. The city air was bitter, but being with her gave me a sliver of warmth. I told her about the crate, about the recordings, about Madison's videos. Her eyes widened with horror. She handed me a small tube of ointment she had in her bag, pressing it into my palm. "Keep everything you can," she said firmly. "Do not delete anything. One day you will need it." Her words lit a fire inside me. For years, I had felt like a ghost, unseen and unheard, but Evelyn's belief reminded me I was not invisible. I started writing digital notes to go with the recordings, time-stamped accounts of each incident. I stored them in a hidden email account, sending copies of videos and voice files to a cloud drive Harold and Madison could not access. Each upload felt like a victory, a small piece of armor against their cruelty. Still, resistance came at a cost. Harold's suspicion grew sharper. One evening, when I returned from class, he was waiting at the door. He yanked my backpack from my shoulders, rifling through it with quick, angry hands. He found nothing but textbooks and notebooks, but the act itself was a warning. Donna hovered nearby, her lips pressed into a line. "You are hiding something," Harold said. "You have that look." My heart raced, but I forced myself to meet his stare. "I am not hiding anything," I whispered. Madison laughed behind him. "She is always hiding something." That night, in the safety of my locked room, I clutched the phone tighter than ever. They could search my bag, they could tear apart my notebooks, but they would never erase the truth I had already stored away. The turning point was not just in gathering evidence, it was in how I began to see myself. For years, I believed I was powerless, that I had no choice but to endure. Now I realized endurance could be weaponized. Every bruise was not just pain, it was proof. Every cruel laugh was not just humiliation, it was testimony. My suffering was no longer just mine to carry. It was a record that could one day bring them down. There were moments of near discovery. Once Harold cornered me in the kitchen after I came home from work. He accused me of sneaking around with boys, his voice booming, his fists clenched. As he shouted, I pressed the hidden phone against my hip, recording every word. My pulse hammered, certain he would notice, certain he would rip it from me. Instead, he finally stormed off, muttering about ungrateful daughters. I sagged against the counter, trembling but triumphant. Another piece of evidence. Another brick in the wall I was building against them. Evelyn became my silent partner. She offered me her old USB drive, telling me to use it as a backup. She promised that if anything ever happened, she would take the files straight to the police. Her loyalty was a lifeline, a reminder that family did not always mean blood. Sometimes it meant the person who saw your pain and chose to stand with you anyway. The contrast between Evelyn's kindness and my family's cruelty sharpened the injustice I lived with. One evening, after a long shift, Evelyn walked me partway home. She stopped me at the corner, pressing my hand and whispering, "You are stronger than you think." I almost cried then, not from pain, but from the shock of someone believing in me. It made me realize that my family's version of reality, the one where I was worthless, was not the only truth. By late February, I had collected hours of recordings, dozens of notes and screenshots of Madison's cruel posts. The weight of evidence grew heavy in my pocket, but instead of dragging me down, it lifted me. It gave me something to hold on to when Harold's fist slammed the table or Donna's sneer sliced into me. I told myself, every second you do this, you are giving me more ammunition. And yet, with every small victory, danger grew. Harold's temper worsened. Donna's disdain deepened. Madison's obsession with filming. Me escalated. I knew the final storm was coming. But for the first time, I did not feel like a helpless victim waiting to be crushed. I felt like a survivor preparing for battle. The turning point was not dramatic, not a single moment of triumph. It was the slow, steady shift inside me, the realization that they could hurt me, but they could not erase the truth. And truth, when revealed, could destroy everything they thought was unshakable. I was no longer just enduring. I was preparing. And soon, the chance to fight back would arrive more violently than I could have imagined. The weeks after I began secretly recording stretched into a blur of fear and resolve. Each day, I walked through the front door of that house bracing for impact, never knowing what form Harold's temper would take. Sometimes it was slamming my backpack against the wall. Sometimes it was ripping my homework to shreds, telling me school was useless for someone like me. Sometimes it was worse. But every encounter added to the archive I carried like armor. I told myself that if I could hold out long enough, justice would find me. What I did not know was that justice often requires a breaking point, and mine came on a frigid March night when the violence reached a level I had only imagined in nightmares. It began with something small, as it often did. I came home from a long shift at the cafe, my feet aching, my hair damp from melted snow. Madison was sitting in the living room with her phone angled toward her face, streaming to a group of friends. When she saw me, her eyes lit up with the cruel spark I had come to dread. She turned the camera on me and said loudly, "Look who finally decided to show up. My little sister, the drama queen." Harold looked up from his chair, his jaw tightening. Why are you late again? It was barely 10 minutes past curfew, but his definition of late was always elastic stretching to fit his mood. I explained about a delayed bus, my voice steady. He stood towering over me, his eyes narrowing. You always have an excuse. You think you can disrespect my rules. Donna entered from the kitchen wiping her hands on a towel, her expression unreadable. She glanced at Harold, then at me, and shook her head. She is lying again. That was all it took. Harold's hand lashed out, striking my shoulder with enough force to spin me sideways. Madison squealed with laughter, her phone capturing every second. "Do it again!" she shouted. "This is gold!" My body hit the wall, pain radiating across my ribs. I gasped, clutching my side, but Harold was not finished. He grabbed my arm and yanked me into the garage, his grip bruising. Madison followed, phone raised, already narrating for her invisible audience. Donna trailed behind, her lips curled in that sneer that told me she would not intervene. The garage was freezing, the air sharp with the smell of oil and gasoline. In the corner, the dog crate loomed like a specter. My stomach dropped. "Not again," I whispered, my voice cracking. Harold's eyes glinted with satisfaction. "Again and again until you learn." He shoved me toward the crate. I stumbled, my knees hitting the concrete hard, the impact jarring through my bones. Madison laughed, zooming in on my face. "Smile for the camera," she mocked. I tried to crawl backward, shaking my head, but Harold's hands were relentless. He grabbed my hair, pulling me forward, his strength overwhelming. My scalp burned, tears sprang to my eyes. He shoved me into the crate, slamming the door shut, the lock clicking with a finality that made my chest constrict. I pressed against the bars, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The metal was icy against my skin, my body curling tight in the cramped space. Madison's voice rang out gleeful. "Everyone is watching," she said. "Look at her cry." Donna's voice followed, low and cruel. "Let her cry. She deserves it." I felt something inside me shatter. It was not just fear anymore. It was humiliation, rage, despair, all crashing together. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. The world blurred, my ears ringing. I clawed at the bars, my fingernails scraping metal, my throat raw from sobbing. My vision dimmed, darkness creeping in at the edges. For a terrifying moment, I thought my body was giving out completely. My knees buckled, my head slumped forward, and everything went quiet. From outside the crate, I heard Madison's triumphant shriek. "Oh my God," she collapsed. "This is perfect." Donna's laugh followed, cold and sharp. "Maybe now she will learn." Harold's chuckle rumbled through the air. "She will wake up. She always does." Their voices blended into a chorus of cruelty, muffled by the rushing in my ears. But deep inside, a flicker of will remained. My fingers brushed against my pocket, feeling the outline of the hidden phone still recording. Even in that pit of despair, I knew I had captured everything. Their words, their laughter, the sound of the lock, my collapse. Proof more damning than any bruise. I forced my eyes open, gasping for air, blinking through tears. My head throbbed, my chest ached, but the flicker of resistance grew stronger. If I stayed, I would die in that crate, reduced to nothing more than a cruel memory. I had to move. I had to escape. Slowly, quietly, I shifted, testing the bars. My body screamed with pain, but adrenaline surged. Harold and Donna, confident in my collapse, had turned away, speaking in low tones about dinner plans. Madison, still filming, was distracted by the comments flooding her stream. For once, their arrogance was my opening. I pressed my weight against the side of the crate, pushing with every ounce of strength I had left. The crate groaned, the latch loosening slightly. My fingers found the edge, jiggling it, heart-hammering. "Please," I prayed silently, "just a little more." With a final desperate shove, the latch gave. The door swung open just enough for me to slip through. I stumbled out, collapsing onto the concrete. Madison gasped, her phone swinging wildly. She shouted, "She is getting out!" Harold turned, his eyes blazing with rage. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline flooding my veins. I bolted past him, my bare feet slapping the cold floor, my breath ragged. Donna lunged forward, grabbing at my arm, but I twisted free, fueled by terror and determination. I dashed through the kitchen, the front door looming ahead. Harold roared behind me, heavy footsteps pounding. Madison shrieked, still filming, her laughter twisted with panic. My fingers fumbled with the lock, the door finally giving way. Cold night air blasted against my face as I sprinted into the darkness. The streets blurred beneath me, my lungs burning, my legs trembling. Snow crunched underfoot, my breath puffing in frantic bursts. Behind me, the house grew smaller, the echoes of their voices fading. I clutched the phone in my pocket like a sacred relic, the recording still running. The city lights shimmered ahead, a promise of safety. I did not stop running until the heavy glass doors of the Milwaukee Police Department rose before me, glowing under the street lamps. My knees buckled, my chest heaved, and I collapsed onto the steps. The phone, slipping from my hand, screen cracked but a live video still playing. Officers rushed toward me, radios buzzing, voices urgent. Paramedics were called. Hands lifted me onto a stretcher. But in that haze of pain and flashing lights, one thought cut through clear as glass. I had made it. I had escaped. And this time I had proof they could never laugh away. The climax of violence had nearly ended me, but it also delivered the evidence that would become their undoing. They thought the crate was my cage. They did not realize it was their prison, too built by their own cruelty, locked by their own words, waiting to close in on them once the truth came out. When the paramedics lifted me onto the stretcher that night in front of the Milwaukee Police Department, I could barely keep my eyes open. My body shook with cold and exhaustion, every muscle screaming from the sprint through icy streets. The fluorescent lights inside the ambulance blurred above me as the medic leaned over, pressing a mask against my face. "Breathe slowly," he instructed. "You are safe now." For the first time in years, I wanted to believe those words. My chest rose and fell in ragged bursts, but beneath the panic, a fragile thread of relief wound its way through me. At Froid Turt Hospital, the paramedics rushed me into the emergency ward. Doctors hovered shining lights in my eyes, pressing on bruises, asking where it hurt. I tried to answer, but my voice cracked. When a nurse gently touched the raw patches on my wrists, I flinched. She exchanged a look with the doctor, both of them silently confirming what I was too broken to say. My body told its own story. They documented everything carefully, photographing the bruises, noting the swelling, marking the fingerprint-shaped welts on my arm. Each flash of the camera felt invasive, yet strangely empowering. Every image was a weapon against Harold, against Donna, against Madison's cruel lens. This time, the recording belonged to me. Not long after Sergeant Daniel Rivera arrived, he was a solid man in his 40s, steady eyes that carried both weariness and compassion. He introduced himself softly, crouching beside the hospital bed so he would not tower over me. "Hannah, I saw the video on your phone," he said, his voice even but firm. "We are opening an investigation tonight." His words made me tremble. The thought of Harold's face when the police knocked on the door sent waves of terror through me, but behind that terror was a spark of justice. I whispered, "They will deny it." Sergeant Rivera nodded. "That is why the recording matters. That is why your testimony matters. You are not alone in this anymore." Hours blurred as nurses drew blood, checked x-rays, and wrapped my ribs. Through the haze of medical questions, I clung to Rivera's presence like a lifeline. He explained that Child Protective Services had been contacted. Though I was legally an adult at 19, CPS would still review the situation because of ongoing abuse in a household where minors had been raised. A woman named Sarah from CPS arrived later that morning. She had kind eyes carrying a notepad and a calm authority that reminded me of a teacher who actually cared. She asked if I could walk her through what had happened using dolls and diagrams if I needed. My throat tightened, but with Rivera sitting nearby, I nodded. Describing the crate broke me all over again. My hands shook as I mimicked the way Harold had shoved me, the sound of the latch, clicking the laughter that followed. Sarah's eyes darkened with anger, though her voice stayed gentle. "No one should treat you this way, Hannah. This is not discipline. This is abuse." Donna's sneer echoed in my memory, that phrase she always used. She deserves it, but hearing Sarah's steady confirmation unraveled years of gaslighting. For once, someone in authority believed me without question. Meanwhile, Madison's video had already begun to circulate beyond her control. What she intended as a private spectacle spread rapidly, and Rivera's team managed to secure multiple copies from students who had recorded it off their screens. The evidence was overwhelming, Harold forcing me into the crate, Madison laughing, Donna's voice sneering in the background. There was no room for misinterpretation. Rivera leaned forward as he explained this, his tone serious. This is no longer family business. This is a criminal case. Later that day, as I lay in a hospital bed with monitors beeping steadily beside me, Rivera received a call. He stepped outside briefly, then returned with a look of grim satisfaction. Harold Carter has been taken into custody, he informed me. Donna as well for complicity. Madison is being questioned. The words made me dizzy. For so long, I had imagined no one would ever touch them, that their power inside our home made them untouchable. Now they were behind bars, even if only temporarily. Still, my relief was tangled with fear. What if they got out? What if they came after me? I voiced this to Rivera, my eyes wide with panic. He assured me protective measures were being put in place, that I would not be forced back into that house. Sarah added that emergency housing and counseling would be arranged. You have choices now, she said. Choices they tried to take away. That night, lying in the hospital bed, I let myself cry without restraint. For once, the tears were not just from pain, but from release. A nurse checked my vitals and offered tissues, whispering, "You are brave." I clung to that word brave, though I did not feel it. I felt broken, fragile, but perhaps bravery was not the absence of fear, but choosing to act despite it. The following morning, Rivera sat with me to prepare an official statement. Every detail mattered, dates times words said. He listened carefully, his pen moving steadily across the notepad. When I faltered, he waited, giving me space. When I shook, he reminded me to breathe. The process was grueling, but with each sentence I spoke, I felt a small piece of control return. My story was no longer theirs to twist. It was mine, documented official. Sarah from CPS returned that afternoon to speak privately. She explained the legal options, protective orders, counseling services, possible charges against Madison for distributing harmful material. She also asked about my support system. Do you have anyone you can trust? I thought of Evelyn immediately. My chest tightened with gratitude. Yes, I said softly. My friend, Evelyn Parker. Sarah nodded, writing down her name. We will contact her. Evelyn arrived later, her face pale with worry. Eyes shining when she saw me propped up in bed. She rushed forward, gripping my hand tightly. Hannah. I was so scared. I squeezed back, tears spilling. You told me to keep proof. I did, she nodded fiercely. That is why you are safe now. Her presence wrapped around me like a shield, stronger than any family tie I had left. Over the next days, investigations deepened. Detectives interviewed neighbors who admitted hearing shouting from the house at odd hours. Teachers submitted reports of my declining grades and visible bruises. Friends shared screenshots of Madison's posts. The puzzle pieces aligned into a picture too damning to ignore. The narrative Harold and Donna had spun for years, that I was dramatic, ungrateful, exaggerating, crumbled under the weight of evidence. When Rivera returned to update me, his expression was resolute. We have enough to move forward with charges. Harold will face counts of domestic battery, false imprisonment, and child abuse. Donna will face neglect and complicity. Madison will face consequences for recording and distributing. The words landed like thunder, both terrifying and liberating. They would finally face what they had done. The night before my discharge, Sarah sat with me one last time. She reminded me that healing would not be simple, that court battles could be messy, that I would need support and patience. But she also said something that lingered in my heart. You took the first step by running here, by refusing to stay silent. That decision saved your life. As I left the hospital with Evelyn by my side, I looked back at the sliding doors, the place where strangers had rushed to help me when my own family had not. The fight ahead would be long. Trials, testimonies, public scrutiny. But walking out of Frodtert wrapped in a borrowed coat, I felt something I had not in years. I felt free enough to breathe, The authorities had stepped in. The evidence was secure. For once, the nightmare no longer belonged only to me. It belonged to them, too, and they would have to answer for it. The days after my release from Frodtert Hospital unfolded like a storm gathering strength. I had expected silence, maybe even some relief, but instead I was thrust into a whirlwind of interviews, paperwork, and questions that forced me to relive moments I wanted to bury. Sergeant Rivera visited nearly every day, his steady presence both exhausting and reassuring. Each time he carried updates folders filled with printed screenshots of Madison's posts, transcripts of phone calls, and witness statements from neighbors who had heard shouting from our garage. He explained carefully that the investigation was moving forward, that the district attorney's office had agreed to press charges. For the first time, Harold and Donna's actions were not locked away in our house. They were written in ink on official documents. Madison, however, was another story. At first, she insisted she had only been playing along, that the videos were nothing more than exaggerated jokes. But as detectives confronted her with evidence, timestamps, live comments from her followers, even her own captions mocking me, her defense began to unravel. I was told she cried during questioning, blaming peer pressure and Harold's influence. Still, the damage was done. Every clip she had shared painted her as more than a bystander. She had been an active participant, fueling the cruelty with a camera in her hand and laughter on her lips. When the preliminary hearing was scheduled at Milwaukee County Courthouse, I felt sick with dread. I had never been in a courtroom before, never imagined I would have to face my abusers in a public arena. Evelyn sat with me the night before, her hand wrapped around mine, as she whispered, "You are ready." They cannot twist the truth anymore. I tried to believe her, but my stomach churned. What if the judge saw me the way Donna always had, as dramatic, ungrateful, weak? The morning of the hearing, the courthouse buzzed with reporters. News of the case had spread quickly, headlines splashed across local outlets, teen girl locked in dog crate family under investigation. As Evelyn and I walked up the courthouse steps, cameras flashed, journalists shouting questions. I kept my eyes on the ground, heart pounding. The idea of strangers knowing my humiliation made me want to crawl back into the shadows, but I forced myself to keep moving. Rivera met us at the entrance, his calm voice guiding me past the chaos. "Focus on the judge, Hannah, not the cameras." Inside the courtroom, I saw them for the first time since my escape. Harold sat at the defense table, his broad shoulders hunched, his jaw clenched tight. Donna sat beside him, her hair perfectly styled, her expression hard and defiant. Madison was behind them, flanked by a juvenile attorney, her eyes red from crying. For a moment, the old fear surged through me. I could almost hear Harold's barked commands, feel Donna's sneer, see Madison's phone light flashing in my face. But then I remembered the video now locked safely on police servers, the evidence undeniable. I straightened in my seat, Evelyn squeezing my hand. The prosecutor laid out the charges: domestic battery, child abuse, false imprisonment for Harold, neglect and complicity for Donna, distribution of harmful material for Madison. Each word felt like a stone placed on a scale balancing years of injustice. Harold's attorney tried to argue it was discipline that I was exaggerating, but when the prosecutor played the video on the courtroom screen, the defense crumbled. Gasps echoed through the room as Harold's voice barked at me to shut up, as Madison laughed as Donna sneered, "Let her cry! She deserves it." The judge's expression hardened. Even Harold shifted uncomfortably, no longer able to hide behind denials. When it was my turn to testify, my knees shook as I approached the stand. My voice trembled at first, but as I described the nights of control, the humiliations, the cage, the words began to pour out with a clarity I had never felt. For years, I had been silenced, told I was imagining things, told to toughen up. Now, every detail was spoken aloud, recorded in official transcripts, preserved in memory, not as exaggerations, but as truth. The defense attorney tried to rattle me, suggesting I was dramatic, that I had provoked Harold. But I met his gaze and said firmly, "Nothing justifies locking a girl in a cage while her family laughs." The room fell silent. Even the defense attorney looked away. During a recess, Donna attempted to approach me in the hallway. She hissed that I was tearing the family apart, that I would regret airing our private business. Evelyn stepped in front of me, Rivera at my side, blocking Donna's path. I stood frozen, but inside I felt a surge of something unexpected. Pity. For years I had begged for her approval, longed for her love. Now I saw her clearly, a woman so consumed by her own bitterness that she would rather sneer at her daughter than admit her mistakes. I realized then that I did not need her love anymore. The most public confrontation came not in the courtroom, but outside when reporters swarmed as we left. One shouted, "Hannah, do you want your family in prison?" I stopped my heart hammering the crowd, pressing close. For a moment, I considered silence. But then I thought of every night in that house, every bruise, every sneer. I lifted my chin and said loudly, I want justice. I want them to understand that cruelty is not discipline, that laughter at someone's suffering is not family, and that cages are for animals, not daughters. The cameras captured every word. The next day, my statement appeared in headlines across Milwaukee. The confrontation was exhausting, draining every ounce of strength I had left. Yet it also carried a strange sense of release. The secret was no longer mine alone. The whole city knew. Strangers wrote messages of support. Survivors reached out with their own stories. For the first time, I felt less alone. Evelyn read some of the messages aloud to me at night, her eyes shining. "See," she said, "your truth matters. The investigation dragged on for weeks, but the momentum was unstoppable. Witnesses testified. Teachers confirmed their suspicions. Neighbors admitted they had heard cries but had been too afraid to intervene. Each piece built a case too strong to deny." Harold remained stone-faced during hearings, but Donna's mask began to crack. Once, as the prosecutor detailed the charges, I caught her eyes. For a flicker of a moment, I saw not defiance, but fear. It was brief, gone as quickly as it appeared, but it told me something vital. For the first time, she understood she could not sneer her way out of this. Madison's testimony was perhaps the most gut-wrenching. She admitted she had filmed everything, claiming she thought it was harmless that Harold had pressured her. She apologized, her voice shaking, tears spilling. But when the prosecutor asked if she had ever tried to stop Harold, she lowered her head and whispered, "No." In that moment, I realized the depth of her betrayal. She had chosen likes and attention over my pain. Whether she was sorry or not no longer mattered. The damage was permanent. As the hearings ended and the trial date was set, Rivera met with me one last time in his office. He thanked me for my courage, reminding me that cases like mine rarely saw justice without persistence. "You carried the weight of proof," he said. "You gave us the tools to act." His words stayed with me. For so long I had believed I was powerless. Now I saw that power does not always come in strength or volume. Sometimes it comes in the quiet act of pressing record, of refusing to let cruelty vanish into silence. The public confrontation was not easy. It ripped open wounds, exposed me to scrutiny, and forced me to relive horrors. But it also marked a turning point. No longer was I the girl crying alone in her room while her family mocked her. I was the young woman standing before a judge, speaking truth, forcing the world to look at what had been hidden. And though the battle was not over, I had finally stepped out of the shadows. The trial stretched over 2 weeks in early June each day, chipping away at the wall of silence my family had built for years. The Milwaukee County Courthouse was packed most mornings with reporters, curious citizens, and even advocacy groups who had taken interest after the videos spread. Walking into that courtroom each day felt like stepping onto a stage I had never auditioned for. My bruises fading, but my scars still fresh. I clutched Evelyn's hand as we took our usual place behind the prosecutor's table, trying to draw strength from her calm presence. Across the room, Harold loomed in his suit, stiff and unyielding, his jaw clenched as though he could grind the charges away with sheer force. Donna sat with her own attorney, her posture rigid, her eyes darting toward me with disdain and something else I could not quite name, fear. Madison appeared smaller than ever, flanked by a juvenile defender, her head bowed. The prosecution presented evidence methodically. First came the medical reports from Froedtert Hospital. Photos of my bruised ribs, the welts on my arms, the swelling across my face. Then came the testimony's neighbors who had heard shouting and crashes, teachers who had noticed my slipping grades, and withdrawn demeanor classmates who had seen Madison's posts. The most devastating piece, though, was the video itself. When the prosecutor played it on the large screen, gasps filled the courtroom. The image of Harold forcing me into the crate, my body curled and trembling. Madison laughing, Donna's voice sneering, it silenced even the defense for a moment. My stomach twisted as I watched tears burning my eyes, but I kept them open. I wanted the judge and jury to see it, to feel it. The defense attempted to spin a narrative of misunderstanding. Harold's lawyer claimed it was discipline gone too far, a misguided attempt to teach respect. Donna's attorney argued she had been passive, not active, merely overwhelmed. Madison's defender painted her as a naive teenager swept along by adults, but each argument crumbled under the weight of evidence. The videos captured not just actions, but intent, Harold's booming commands, Donna's sneer, Madison's glee. There was no misunderstanding cruelty recorded in real time. When I took the stand again, the courtroom felt colder. My voice trembled as I described the night of my escape, the sprint through snowy streets, the collapse in front of the police station. The defense tried to shake me, pressing on whether I had exaggerated, whether I had provoked. I answered steadily. No one provokes being shoved into a cage. No one provokes their sister to film humiliation. No one provokes a mother to sneer at suffering. Each response seemed to hang in the air, undeniable. The closing arguments sealed the case. The prosecutor reminded the court that cages are for animals, not children, and that laughter at abuse is not parenting, it is cruelty. He pointed to me, reminding the jury that I had survived, that my courage had brought the truth to light. Harold's lawyer muttered about family unity and regret, but even he sounded hollow. The day of the verdict, the courthouse buzzed like a hive. Reporters jostled for position, cameras lined the steps. Inside, the judge entered, the jury filed in, and silence fell heavy. I gripped Evelyn's hand so tightly, my knuckles whitened. The foreperson stood unfolding the slip of paper. We, the jury, find the defendant Harold Carter guilty on all counts: domestic battery, child abuse, false imprisonment. A murmur rippled through the room. My heart pounded as the words continued. We find the defendant Donna Carter guilty of neglect and complicity. Another wave of murmurs. We find the juvenile defendant Madison Mitchell guilty of distribution of harmful material. The judge's voice followed, steady and firm. Harold Carter is hereby sentenced to 15 years in state prison. Donna Carter is sentenced to 3 years suspended with probation and 5 years of supervised release, including mandatory counseling. Madison Mitchell, due to her age, is sentenced to community service counseling and a ban on social media use for 3 years. The words echoed like bells in my head. 15 years, prison. It was not enough to erase what they had done, but it was something I never thought possible. Harold's face twisted with fury, his fists clenching as deputies moved closer. Donna's composure cracked her mouth, tightening, tears threatening. Madison sobbed openly, her shoulders shaking. For once, the laughter was gone. Outside the courthouse, the media swarmed. Reporters shouted questions about my feelings, about forgiveness, about the future. I paused on the steps, the sun warm on my face, the crowd buzzing. I lifted my chin, my voice steady. This was never about revenge. It was about safety, about showing that cruelty has consequences. No one should laugh while their daughter is in pain. No one should call humiliation a joke. Justice matters. My words traveled quickly, appearing in headlines and broadcasts across Milwaukee. In the days that followed, the consequences unfolded like aftershocks. Harold was transferred to a state prison, his construction company publicly cutting ties. Donna's friends distanced themselves, whispers filling the neighborhood about her complicity. Madison lost her place in college programs, her social accounts deleted, her reputation shattered. The ripple effect was harsh, but it was the reality of choices made and actions taken. For me, the aftermath was a strange mixture of relief and grief. Relief that the truth had been acknowledged, that Harold's looming shadow no longer hovered in every doorway. Grief that my own mother and sister had been part of the cruelty, that family had failed me so completely. Some nights I woke sweating, hearing Donna's sneer in my dreams. Other nights I wept quietly for the sister I had once shared a room with, long before phones and cameras turned her into my tormentor. Evelyn reminded me that forgiveness was not an obligation, that healing did not require reopening wounds. Therapy sessions with Dr. Margaret Chin became my anchor. She guided me through the tangled emotions, reminding me that strength and fragility could coexist. She asked me once what victory looked like to me. I thought about it for a long time before answering. Victory is not revenge. It is walking into a room without flinching. It is knowing that my voice carries weight. It is never being caged again. 6 months after the verdict, I stood once more outside the Pfister Hotel, where my journey into adulthood had been interrupted by chaos. I was working part-time again at the cafe, saving for tuition in social work. The city felt different now, not because it had changed, but because I had. I was no longer just Hannah the victim. I was Hannah the survivor, the witness, the young woman who refused to let silence define her. The consequences had landed heavy and irreversible. Harold behind bars, Donna under supervision, Madison forced to confront the damage she had done, and me finally free enough to breathe, to plan, to dream. The courtroom had been the stage for their downfall, but my healing would be the story of my life moving forward. Justice was not perfect, but it was real, and that reality was enough to close one chapter and begin another. The months following the trial moved differently, as though time itself had shifted. For so many years, my life had been measured by Harold's temper, Donna's sneers, and Madison's phone camera. Every day felt like a countdown to the next humiliation. After the verdict, the countdown ended. For the first time since I was 10 years old, I woke up without the shadow of Harold's footsteps echoing through the halls. It was disorienting, almost surreal. Freedom can feel strange when you have lived most of your life in captivity. I did not go back to that house. Sarah, from Child Protective Services, had made it clear from the beginning that I would not be forced into contact with my mother or sister. Instead, Evelyn opened her door without hesitation. She lived in Bayview, not far from the lakeshore, in a modest home filled with warmth that felt foreign but safe. Her parents welcomed me gently, never asking too many questions, simply letting me sit in silence when the weight of memory grew too heavy. For the first few weeks, I slept in fits, waking at the faintest sound, heart pounding as though Harold would storm through the door. Evelyn stayed close, sometimes sleeping on the floor of her room, just so I would not feel alone. Therapy with Dr. Chen became the center of my routine. She reminded me gently that healing is not linear, that trauma lingers, but it does not have to define the future. She guided me through grounding exercises, breathing techniques, and writing prompts. At first, I resisted, ashamed to put words on paper after Harold had once burned my notes in the fireplace. But slowly, journaling became a way to reclaim my story. I wrote about the crate, about the night I ran about the courtroom. I wrote about Evelyn's kindness, about the nurses who whispered that I was brave, about Rivera's calm strength. Writing transformed my pain from chaos into testimony, from silence into voice. School had been disrupted by the trial, but I returned to community college determined. Professors offered extensions, classmates offered quiet nods of solidarity. Some avoided me, uncomfortable with my notoriety. I did not mind. I was not there to please them. I was there to rebuild. I shifted my studies towards social work, inspired by Sarah and Dr. Chen. If they could step into my life and change its direction, maybe someday I could do the same for someone else. Work at the cafe became more than income, it was therapy. The hum of conversation, the hiss of the espresso machine, the smell of roasted beans, it grounded me. Regular customers smiled at me, not with pity, but with normalcy. That normalcy was a gift. Each shift reminded me that life existed outside trauma, that my identity could be more than victim or survivor. The hardest part of recovery was dealing with Madison. Though the court had banned her from social media and sentenced her to community service, she attempted to reach out through letters delivered to Evelyn's house. At first, I refused to open them, shoving them into a drawer. Evelyn asked gently if I wanted to read them. One night, curiosity won. Madison's words spilled across the page in shaky handwriting, filled with apologies, excuses, and claims that she had only followed Harold's lead. She begged for forgiveness, saying she missed me, saying she wanted her sister back. I read the letter 3 times, my heart torn. Part of me longed for the girl I had once shared secrets with before cruelty became her currency. But another part of me knew that forgiveness could not erase the humiliation she had broadcast to thousands. I brought the letter to therapy. Dr. Chen listened quietly, then asked, "What does forgiveness mean to you, Hannah?" I thought hard before answering. Forgiveness is not pretending it did not happen. Forgiveness is not welcoming someone back into my life without accountability. Forgiveness, if it comes, will be for me, not for her. Dr. Chin nodded, saying softly, "That is wisdom." Forgiveness is a choice, not an obligation. Donna never reached out directly, though I heard through court updates that she struggled under the weight of probation. For a long time, I imagined her sneer softening, perhaps even regret flickering in her heart. But as months passed, I realized it did not matter. Whether she regretted or not, her silence spoke louder than any words. She had chosen Harold over me, laughter over protection. That choice could not be undone. One milestone of recovery came unexpectedly. 6 months after the trial, Evelyn encouraged me to attend a support group for survivors of domestic violence. At first, I resisted, too nervous to sit in a circle and share. But when I finally walked into the small room at a local community center, I found something remarkable. Women of all ages sat there, some with stories eerily similar to mine, others different but threaded with the same pain. As I listened, I felt the heavy weight of isolation lift. I was not the only one. When my turn came to speak, my voice trembled, but I said the words out loud. My stepfather locked me in a crate. My mother sneered. My sister filmed. The room did not laugh. They nodded, eyes shining with empathy, and whispered, "We believe you." That moment was transformative. Over time, I began to speak more publicly. Advocacy groups invited me to share my story at small event schools and community meetings. At first, it terrified me, standing before strangers with my scars laid bare. But each time I spoke, I saw faces soften, saw other survivors muster courage to speak their own truths. My story, once used to humiliate me, became a tool for connection and change. One evening after an event, an older woman approached me, tears in her eyes. She said she had been silent about her abusive husband for decades, but hearing my story gave her the strength to finally leave. In that moment, I understood the true power of speaking out. My pain had not been in vain if it could help someone else escape. Healing was not just about looking backward, it was also about daring to imagine a future. I started planning for transfer to the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee to pursue a degree in social work. I dreamed of becoming a counselor for young people trapped in situations like mine. I wanted to be the person I had once needed, the voice that says, "I believe you, you are not alone." The closure came not in a grand moment, but in small, quiet victories. The first time I walked alone through downtown Milwaukee without flinching at every sound. The first time I laughed freely with Evelyn, not caring if anyone heard. The first time I looked in the mirror and saw not just the bruised girl from the videos, but a young woman standing tall. One evening, standing outside the Pfister Hotel after a long shift, I looked up at the glowing windows and whispered to myself, "I survived. I won. No one will ever put me in a cage again." The words filled me with a strength I had never known. The message I carried forward was simple yet profound. Family is not defined by blood, but by protection and love. Harold had been a stepfather, Donna, a mother, Madison, a sister, yet none of them had acted like family. Evelyn Rivera, Dr. Chin Sarah from CPS, these were the people who stepped in, who believed, who protected. They were proof that family can be chosen, that love can come from unexpected places. As I share my story now, I ask others to reflect. What would you do if cruelty hid behind the walls of your home? Would you stay silent or would you speak? Justice is not easy and healing is not quick, but silence is far more dangerous. To every survivor who hears my words, you are not alone and you are not to blame. To those who doubt, remember that cages may be hidden, but the scars they leave are real. My life is no longer measured by Harold's rage or Donna's sneers or Madison's laughter. It is measured by steps forward, by breaths taken freely, by voices joined together in truth. That is my victory. That is my freedom. When I look back now, I realize my story was never just about me. It was about the choices people make when confronted with cruelty, whether they look away, laugh along, or step in. Harold chose violence. Donna chose denial. Madison chose to film, but Rivera chose to listen. Sarah chose to intervene. Dr. Chin chose to guide me. Evelyn chose to open her door when no one else would. And I chose finally to run, to speak, to refuse silence. That choice saved me. To those of you listening, especially those in your 50s, 60s, 70s people who have lived long enough to know how heavy family ties can weigh, I ask you to reflect. How many times have you witnessed something cruel brushed off as discipline, tough love, or just a joke? How many times have you heard a child cry and told yourself, that is none of my business? How many times have you stayed quiet because speaking felt too risky? I understand. Silence feels safe. But silence is also permission, and permission feeds abusers. If my neighbor Melissa had not forwarded me that first video, if Evelyn had not reminded me to keep proof, if Rivera had not taken my trembling words seriously, I might still be locked in that house. Or worse, I might not be here at all. It took one person after another choosing courage instead of convenience. That is what justice truly requires. So I ask you now, what would you do if cruelty lived next door? Would you intervene? Would you call? Would you believe the trembling voice of a young girl who says, something is wrong? Your answer could be the difference between another tragedy and another survival. For those of you who are survivors yourselves sitting quietly with your own memories, I see you. I know what it feels like to wake in the night heart racing, convinced the door will fly open. I know what it feels like to question your worth because the people who should have loved you convinced you that you deserved pain. You did not deserve it. You never did. And no matter how many years have passed, it is not too late to reclaim your voice. Healing is not measured by time, it is measured by courage, and courage can arrive at any age. I also speak to the parents and grandparents listening. Ask yourself honestly, do the children in your life feel safe to come to you with their fears? Do they know you will believe them even if what they say makes you uncomfortable? My greatest wound was not Harold's fists or Madison's camera. It was Donna's sneer, the certainty in her eyes that I was not worth protecting. If you take nothing else from my story, let it be this: children remember the moment they realize whether you are safe or not. Be the safe one. Be the one they remember for believing, for protecting, for standing between them and harm. Some of you may wonder, Hannah, how can you stand here and tell this story without being destroyed by it? The truth is, I was destroyed. Many times. But each time I built something new from the ruins. First, I built evidence. Then I built a case. Now I am building a life. That is the lesson I carry forward. You cannot always stop people from trying to break you, but you can decide what to build from the pieces. So here is my challenge to you. Do not look away. Do not laugh off cruelty as a joke. Do not assume silence means safety. If you see something, say something. If you hear something, check. If you suspect something, trust your gut. And if you are living it yourself, know this escape is terrifying, but staying will always be worse. I invite you to think of your own family stories. Were there moments when someone stood up for you, when someone believed in you, when someone's courage changed the course of your life? Or were there moments when silence hurt more than words? Share those stories. Speak them aloud. Write them down. Post them in the comments so others know they are not alone. You never know who might read your words and finally find the courage to act. And for those who believe that forgiveness is the end goal, let me be clear. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. Forgiveness is not erasing consequences. Forgiveness is not excusing cruelty. If it comes, it must come on your terms in your time for your healing. I may or may not forgive Madison someday. I may or may not forgive Donna, but I will never erase what they did, and that is okay, because justice does not require forgiveness. Justice requires truth. Now, as I move forward, studying social work, speaking out, walking freely down the streets of Milwaukee, I carry a message for anyone willing to listen. You are never too old, too weak, or too late to stand up against cruelty. I was 19 when I finally ran. Some of you are 60, 70, even older. You can still choose courage. You can still choose to believe. You can still choose to act. So here is my call to you. If you have lived through something like this, comment below. Share one sentence of your story. It can be as simple as "I survived" or "I understand." Your words might be the lifeline someone else needs. If you have ever stepped in for someone, tell us what happened. Your courage deserves to be remembered. And if you are still silent, still living with secrets, let this be your sign. You do not have to carry it alone anymore. Finally, if my story resonated with you, if you believe more stories like mine deserve to be heard, subscribe to this channel. Each story we tell is another brick in the wall against silence, another voice added to the chorus saying, "No more." Together we can make sure cages are dismantled, that sneers lose their power, that laughter at pain is replaced with action for protection. I survived because people chose to listen. Will you be that person for someone else?